Welcome to The Journey, a podcast to help you be the very best parent you can be. We are thrilled you are here and that we get to do life together. We are here to serve your family, and we're thankful you're joining us on The Journey.
Hey parents, welcome to this week's episode of The Journey. We're actually picking up a conversation that we started last week with Erin Williams, our upper school counselor, on the book Bad Therapy. We talked a lot about some really important things that the author Abigail Schreier had pointed out about bad therapy, and now we're going to take a shift into some of the good therapy and good parenting that really needs to be addressed in that. So if you missed last week's episode, please go back and review it and take a look at it and share it with other people. But enjoy this week's episode as we dive into more on bad therapy with our upper school counselor, Erin Williams. So let's talk a little bit about when she starts talking about what parenting is really all about.
Yes.
Like what's the goal of parenting,
Yep.
right? What's the tell us? What's the end goal? What do we hope to accomplish? She talks about the idea that, right, for generations, it was the goal for parents to transmit values to their kids.
Yeah.
Not for their kids to be happy,
Right.
or their kids to be successful, or for their kids to get into the right college, right? But for their kids to be, quality men and women who know how to make good decisions, right? That was the goal, right? And whether your kid's going to be, blue collar, white collar, gets in the right college, whatever, right? It was, I want to make sure that my son or daughter is a man or woman of integrity, right? And has character and has principles. And now it seems like, even though we say those things are important, right, our energies are placed more on the outward expression of our kids, right? Yeah. It's a lot of sports, it's a lot of performance and things like that. And so it feels like for a young child, right, that they're kind of in that tension, right, where I think the idea is I want to be a person of character and integrity, right, but I also want to win the games and I want to be the star of the show and things like that, right? I want to succeed. And I think what she's saying is, right, you have to be very careful of that is you need to make sure your kids understand what the primary thing, right, and I always say this is like, whatever you're focused on the most, right, is what your kids are going to pick up on.
I mean, that's right from that Never Enough book, right, all of this. And I think she touches on it too. Where are you... There's something called external locus of control and internal. Like, where are you looking for value? Or if you're looking for it out there in what your parents are saying, or it's the grades, it's the no matter what you're saying, whatever your parents are showing you.
Yes.
Like, it's really important that you get into the school or do this certain thing. Well, what's going to happen is you're going to turn these kids as they get older. They're always going to be looking for that. Yep. So after that, they're going to be like, I need the next deal. I need the next promotion. Like we have to turn it to intrinsic.
How do we do that from a parenting perspective?
Yep.
Because we often reward performance as opposed to character. Right. So I mean, and just we do it as a school as well.
Yeah.
When Johnny and Susie determine which college they're going to go to. Yeah. Right. We announce that, but we don't tell you, right, that the only reason that they're going to that is because they cheated on the test. Right. I mean, it just makes sense. It's like, wait a second. So how do we as a parent really reward character and integrity as opposed to just performance?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just about your family culture. Yeah. Everybody, again, I think in the book Never Enough, she was saying that most parents say character is super important and aren't as concerned about all of these external things, but they think other parents are concerned about them. And so that's what they want.
So
I'm worried, I don't really care much about it, but Dan does, and I really want to look good to Dan, so I'm going to tell him that my son Levi got into, and so that's what I'm concerned about, how it looks. Yeah. And so you really got, again, you just have to check yourself and really change, figure out what your family culture is. And they're going to have to go out into the world and see this.
And I think it's funny. It's that social media concept too. Right. Where you scroll through social media and you see everybody's best.
Sure.
Right. But you tell yourself, well, that's not their real life. Right. Because they don't put all the negative things. Right. But you're the one scrolling through, looking at all their highlights, and you're allowing those highlights of somebody else's life to influence you. Right? And it's like, well, wait a second. If you know that, why are you spending time looking at everybody else's highlights if you know nobody's posting negative things?
Right. Or not at least reminding yourself, like you do. I mean, I get stuck in it like everybody else. And then all of a sudden, my hair's not shiny enough. My house isn't clean enough. My children aren't, all the things. And so you just got to really check yourself.
Hey, parents, a big thank you to this episode's sponsor, Guidestone Financial Services. Guidestone is a fantastic organization that has been connected with and involved with PCA for a number of years. Their mission at Guidestone is to enhance the financial security and resilience of those who serve the Lord, which is people like you and me. They do retirement, insurance, and investments. And Dr. O.S. Hawkins, who is a PCA grandparent and the recipient of this year's Zig Ziglar Servant Leadership Award, was the leader and CEO of Guidestone for a number of years and is really connected with their Mission Dignity program. So check out Guidestone. We've talked a lot about, because the book's called Bad Therapy.
Yep.
Can we talk a little bit about how to find good therapy?
Yes.
Right. What does it look like as a therapist?
Yes.
What does it look like when you go in to evaluate the wisdom that's being given to you? And can we remind people that you're not stuck with the therapist,
Sure.
right? Just because you go in there, if they're giving you advice and wisdom that isn't lining up to God's word, right? You don't have to go back, or in a sense, you don't have to digest, right, what somebody else is putting on your plate if it's not going to be good for you.
Yeah.
Right? So what are you going to look for?
A couple things about therapy. I do think therapists have sort of this position of power because you're thinking and they are experts in their field, but
Right.
you have to know, and she says this in the book, and we know this, that you are the parent. God gave you these kids
Yes.
for a reason.
Yes.
So you know your kid a million times better than any therapist, any teacher, anybody else. So, I was thinking about this when I was driving in today. My daughter, they were telling me that she really needs to do pre-K-5, and that was the best kind of advice they could give me. And man, I was distraught about it because I was like, I was going back and forth, and I was like, I think this, but they think this. And teachers to us are in this place of power because you
Right.
know best. And so we really had to wrestle with that. And at the end of the day, I had to say, wait a second, I'm the parent here.
Right.
And that was interesting to go through that process, but remind myself, okay, I know what's best for my child. I know her a million times better than anyone in this school, so I'm going to make this choice. Same thing with therapy. So I think to find a good therapist, I always obviously love to go off referral for the teenagers that I know. I'm like, hey, who has been here and had a good experience?
Right.
As a parent, I think you have to get an interview. If they're not willing to talk to you, just be done with it.
Okay.
If they're not willing to sit down and say, like, I have a few questions for you. You're about to spend a lot of time with my son and daughter.
Right.
I need a little bit of time with you.
Yeah.
I think some good questions to ask are the worldview. Maybe you're not looking for biblical counseling, but you're looking for counseling with people who have like a worldview of Christianity, because biblical counseling is different than secular counseling from a Christian therapist. Also asking, like, what percentage of kids do you see that are 15-year-old males? I love to ask that question because if I have a 15-year-old boy and you only
Don't see any of them.
and you don't see any of them or none of them, or you don't work with teenagers, well, then you're not for me.
Right.
So,
Right.
like, how many kids are you seeing of this particular age? And kind of like, what are how long are those kids normally in therapy? What have the outcomes been?
Yeah.
And, I will say this again. I tell most parents that therapy isn't always the best choice. Sometimes you need to just pair your kid or find a really good adult in their life who's important to them, because people like you and me are at school every day.
Yes.
So when something goes down at school or something happened last night, we're available immediately and we can work through that thing. We're not necessarily doing therapy here, but we're coaching you through something.
Right.
And really we want to get these kids unstuck. That's always my goal. So I don't do therapy here, even though I'm a therapist, but my job is like to get you unstuck. Like, let's get past this.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to take your kids to therapy, I think it can be helpful for a lot of things. Again, it takes, I think, more time than it does with adults, because building that rapport with a counselor just takes time.
Sure.
And when you're there an hour a week, that's not a whole lot of time to build a relationship. And it really is a relationship. And so just really getting in there and interviewing them, getting referrals from other people that you know, like anything else. Don't treat it any different than like you would a doctor or any place that you're sending them in kind of alone, and make sure that they're working with you, that they're willing to work with you as parents too. Like, you need that feedback.
Well, it's very interesting because as you're talking about this, you're a therapist that's working at a school.
Right.
And most of the chapters that she deals with here about bad therapy really deal with school therapists, but they're at a public school. And I think that's one of the dangerous things is that because that situation doesn't exist here, a lot of what she's writing about and a lot of the bad therapy, of Johnny or Susie walking into a school counselor's office, right, and them saying, "Oh, I think you have, gender dysphoria."
Yes.
Right. And the problem, because they have the state backing behind them, so that when they say something, then the state can, reinforce that, and then all of a sudden it's the state versus the parent.
Right.
Right.
Terrible.
And can I just tell you, right, as you read this and some of the very, very dark chapters that she's writing about, I'm just like, oh my goodness, another reason that we are so blessed to be here at PCA. Because we don't have that reality that we have to deal with. We're trying to work with parents, right?
It kind of made me angry, honestly,
Very much
because
so.
I worked in public school for a lot of years, and we have a responsibility no matter where we're working to do the right thing for students.
Right.
And I actually did therapy in public schools, and one of the things we talked about was if a student is okay at school, if they're not unable to get to class or like skipping class or whatever they're dealing with, if they're still able to get through the school day, I'm not going to do therapy with them to unearth their trauma.
But you can see how a person with a particular agenda.
Sure. 100%.
And it was so devastating to read about just chapter after chapter after chapter of just this misuse of the power. And really the access to kids.
Right.
And
I think this
about.
social emotional learning, even, we have to be careful even with what we do here because, again, I don't need you to tell me about your parents' divorce right before math class, or like if we're doing a social emotional circle and we're like wanting you to, like as a therapist, as a teacher, you need to be able to read like the room. You should know about your student's background. That's not an appropriate time to talk about those things and be like, okay, it's, time to go to centers. I don't know, whatever or algebra or calculus. It's like, if they're holding it together during school, okay, maybe they need to see a therapist after school, or when they're ready to talk, that's the time to lean in. If they're coming in crying or upset, that's the time to lean in, but not like searching out that stuff.
Now, one of the things that you and I both do, right, is we have snacks in the office.
Yes, snacks are key.
Because, we want kids in our office, right, and we want them to feel comfortable.
Yes.
And then we want them to maybe stay and chat a little bit.
Yes.
And they do.
Yeah,
and it's interesting how those conversations, so in the 20 years that I've been here, I would say that the number one conversation I've had with young people is about their parents' divorce, right? Because after a while of building that, rapport with a young person, when you have conversations and they see you as a trusted adult, it's like kids want to talk about these things. And one of the most difficult things, so, my parents divorced when I was 33, so I was a little bit older.
Yeah.
But if you're a young person and you're walking through a very difficult thing where you're not able to really talk to your parents because a child of divorce is different than being a parent.
Yeah.
Right? And, we talk about the idea that, parents have like ex-spouses, but kids don't have ex-parents.
Right. It's good.
And so, right, it's just that reality that they have to deal with. And so I think one of the things that this book unfortunately doesn't deal with is just the positive ability for people to help other people navigate life and speak truth into their life, where she's pointing out there's a lot of bad therapy out there. And I'm kind of looking at going, you know what, there's a lot of really good therapy in here.
I agree.
Right? Because not only are you and I having those conversations, but I know so many teachers, so many coaches, right? With my own 4 kids, a lot of the coaches, right, were speaking truth into the lives of my kids. Sometimes to push back on things that they weren't doing well, sometimes to encourage them and lift them up, right? And I think that's one of the amazing things here is that with a biblical worldview, right, we're able to present truth to kids in whatever form that it is. And so that's the one thing, when, as you've worked in the public school system, you're a therapist, and so I know this book kind of bristled you in so many different ways. But I think one of the things that it really made me appreciate is that, at PCA we can do things so differently than what this book is writing about.
And I think it also just reminds you of your God-given ability to be a parent. Like, you are the parent here. Like, God gave you all the things you need. Because some days I'm like, I should not be a parent. I'm like, I don't think I was meant for this. But like, God gave me these kids for a reason.
Okay, back to the show, Adolescence.
Yes.
That was the one thing that really bothered me the most about the show, was that how parenting and raising kids was seen as such a negative thing. Right? So the 2 detectives have this conversation about having kids, right? And the woman detective is like, she doesn't really want to have kids, and the guy's like, well, I never wanted to have kids, but he has one, and he's doing a terrible job. He's doing a terrible job with it. At the end, he begins to lean into it a little bit. But I just thought, How sad.
Yeah.
Right? And the show has the kids in school, and then it has kids in a detention facility, and they look identical, right? And I'm just like, there is so much hopelessness and helplessness. And then the parents at the end, right? The last episode is the parents kind of wrestling with the whole idea of, could we have done something more? Could we have done something better? And basically the dad's like, listen, my dad beat me and I did better than my dad, so there's nothing else I can do. And I'm like, that's such a sad view of parenting, right? And I think that's one of the great things, that she's trying to remind, Abigail Schreier is trying to remind parents with the book Bad Therapy is, don't push out all parenting to somebody else just because they're professional. Lean into, right, guiding your kids. And I had a conversation with a person the other day as, I wish there were a book on parenting. And I'm like, there is. It's called the Bible, right? And God actually fashions himself as a parent, which is kind of a crazy thing to think about, right? But he gives us that hope, right, of just like, listen, I know I'm not going to do it perfectly, but God, right, with me, we can parent these children. We can help them. We can guide them.
Well,
right? I can get wisdom from God, right? Where I don't just have to look around and read the right book or find the right whatever. It's like God can actually give me insight into the kid that He created, 100%. So that I can help understand them.
Yeah. Well, just a little reminder of that for me. Amanda Henderson, our lower school counselor, was with my son this morning, and I was telling her, well, I was crying every day at school until I was like in high school. I had a really tough time. And she said, well, isn't it beautiful that God gave you a son who is struggling maybe in the same way so that you can help him and that God can work that healing through him and you. And I'm like, oh gosh, thank you. It just so is good. And to be in a place where my kid's lower school counselor is telling me that, is reminding me that God gave me the ability and me to my son for that reason. And so it just, after working in the public school system and I didn't realize how oppressed I felt there, or how it just felt heavy until I came here. And just the ability to walk around and just say the name Jesus and to talk about this with staff, with colleagues. It's so freeing, and to know that our kids are just so well, we don't do it perfectly, but we take care of them so well, and that we want to not have you usurp your parenting to other people, but come alongside you and really do it well with you the best we can. Yeah.
Well, thanks for doing a great job as a therapist at PCA, as our upper school counselor, and thanks for reading the book Bad Therapy for me and with me so that we could talk about it. That's one of the things I love, though, is we're trying to look at what the world is wrestling with, right? And we're seeing, right, the books that we've read, we're seeing that there's so much that they're examining and saying, hey, are we paying attention to this? And that's a great thing. But then we're also saying that because we have a different worldview, we can navigate it differently than what they're doing. And that's the thing. I remember, Coddling of the American Mind, right, by Jonathan Haidt. His solution at the end basically was have family dinner time.
Yeah,
and I'm laughing at so many of the books that are written by non-Christians who are going back to values, worldview, family, structure, right? All those different things.
Just real quick, speaking of that, I was in my office earlier looking at my books, and there's this one called Reviving Ophelia. It's a book about middle school girls in their adolescence, and there's interviews that their psychologists do of these girls. And one of the things that is like a marker of resilience is having something outside yourself.
Yes.
Like to get like having community. It's just, it all goes back. It's shocking. I'll write it, and you've seen it in the columns of this book. Oh, this is a biblical, like this is, of course, like all these kids found resilience through being in community, seeing something out, knowing the world is bigger than themselves, which is biblical.
Yeah,
I love it.
Anyway, keep up the good work,
Thank
Erin,
you.
and thanks for the time talking about Bad Therapy.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Journey. We hope this podcast provides information to help you raise your children, and it would help us tremendously if you would like, subscribe, share, and review this content on your favorite podcast platform. It is our pleasure to provide this information to our community, and we look forward to our next time together on The Journey.